Hello and welcome to this video, which is going to be talking about servicing a TD5 Land Rover Discovery Series 2. Now the vehicle I'm going to be servicing is the diesel and it's a manual gearbox. This particular vehicle happens to be the 10p variant, but what I'm going to be showing you is pretty much the same if you've got the 15p variant, so don't worry too much about that. What I'm going to be referring to is this, which is the official Land Rover service schedule for the Series 2 Discovery. Although I will be covering everything on this list in my service, I won't be showing you everything on the video, and the reason for that is because it includes things like checking your light bulbs, tyre pressures, tyre depth, making sure the horn works, checking the condition of the windscreen wipers. It will make for a boring video if I'm just showing you how to do those things, which to be honest you should be doing all the time anyway, not just leaving it to your 6 monthly service. Right, some of the parts you'll need are here. You've got things like the centrifuge filter, the standard full flow filter, the fuel filter. This is, you should recognise this, an air filter, and of course you're going to need oil and some grease. I happen to buy my oil in 20 litre drums because I get through a fair bit of it, but you don't have to do that. And the oil grade we're using here is 5W30, and that's the oil grade recommended for Land Rover in most applications. You can service it using 5W40, depends on which country you're in, what climate you're operating in. If you check the handbook will give you guidance on which oil is best, not just for your vehicle but for where you're operating. I've mentioned that part of the official Land Rover service schedule is checking all of the lights. The only part of that I'm going to show you is this aspect of the rear light cluster, just to point out that there are in fact 2 light bulbs on each side for the rear red tail light. They're separated by a thin metal plate, but as you can see from this angle there are 2 bulbs. It's quite common for one to go and for people to not realise it, and before you know it you've got no light at all there, so it's worth checking them. Next is checking the operation of the handbrake. I'm on a slight hill here, so I'm going to hold the vehicle on the foot brake. Is it working smoothly? Yes, it is. Next I'm going to check the amount of clicks. 3 clicks and then it goes tight. That is perfect. That is exactly where it should be. If you're getting more than 3 clicks, then you need to readjust your handbrake, and you can read up how to do that in the handbook. Okay, so now we're coming up to removing the road wheels so that we can check things like the brake discs, brake pads, the sensors on the wheel, and while I'm doing this side I'll be dealing with the fuel filter. If you're like me and working on a driveway, you can only do one side at a time. Some important safety things are to remember that these vehicles are heavy, so use a decent jack and remember to chock the diagonal opposite wheels, which in this case when I'm doing both wheels at the same time will be both of the near side wheels, and never work under a vehicle supported only by a jack. Do use decent axle stands. The axle stands I'm using here are rated for 3 tonne per pair, so that's 1.5 tonne per axle stand, which I'm happy with for this vehicle. I'm quite comfortable working under the car held up by these particular stands, but please don't take any shortcuts. The keen-eyed amongst you might notice that we've got wheel nut indicators on our car. Those little black things on the wheel nuts, don't worry about them, you won't see them on many British cars. These are souvenirs from the Gibb River Road in Australia, which we drove down amongst other roads last year. We saw at least 3 different vehicles that had come to grief having lost a wheel, on that road, numerous trailers, and it's all down to the corrugations and the roughness of the roads shaking any nut and bolt loose. And if you lose a wheel, it takes out the studs, it takes out the brakes, the discs, and damages suspension and bodywork. So it's quite a horrible way for your trip to end. And if you think about it, it's avoidable if you do your regular vehicle checks. And of course, wheel nut indicators enable you to check your wheel nuts at a glance without having to get the spanners out. And we did, on at least 2 occasions, find that we did have nuts working loose, so it certainly saved us. But like I say, don't really need them in the UK. Before you raise the vehicle, you need to just crack the wheel nuts loose. It will make life a lot easier for you once the vehicle wheel is off the ground. If you're not familiar with how to jack up your Land Rover to get to your wheels, you want to be looking for this notch here on your radius arms. You've got a similar notch on both front and back, and you can see I'll position my jack just underneath that, and that's where I'll be jacking it up from. So the wheel's off and we're securely set up on axle stands. What I'm going to show you here is going to be pretty much the same for all 4 wheels. One of the things I do, and it is actually listed on the service schedule, is a yearly corrosion check. I don't do mine yearly, I do mine pretty much all the time, every time I'm doing some maintenance. This section here had gone rusty where it meets the inner sill, so I've already removed all of the old metal and I've butt welded a new section in and painted it. From the gravel roads in Australia, the whole of the wheel arch was pebble dashed and down to bare metal in places, so that's why it's all freshly coated to protect it. Right, the first thing I've noticed is that the ride height sensor is starting to perish just around here. I don't know if you can see that, I'm having trouble focusing the camera, and it's a bit dark. In fact, it's clouding over, so I think I'm going to have to call it quits soon because it's going to be chucking it down with rain any time. That needs replacing, but not quite yet. What I'm going to do is order the spare part and have that in the car and replace it a little bit down the road. But the rest of the ride height sensor is fine. Over to the left of that are the shock absorbers. This is nice and dry, there's no signs of leaking from your shock absorber. Obviously if you've got oil, shock absorber fluid coming out of here, you're looking at replacing your shock absorber. Moving over here, we've got the bag for the air suspension. I've already had a look at that. I've looked for cracks and excess friction and rubbing on the rubber. This one's less than a year old, so it's still in very good condition. I also checked to make sure the 2 clips at the top, one there and one there, are still in position and haven't gone anywhere. Next, I'm looking at the routing of all the wires and cables, including the brake lines. You can see a nice bright copper brake line there. No signs of corrosion, no signs of leaking, and I've followed the brake line, the flexible brake line, all the way back to the caliper. I'm happy that there's no chafing, no wear, and absolutely no leaks whatsoever. I've also looked at the wiring. This one here in the middle going down is the road wheel speed sensor. That is showing some signs of wear, so I know that that's going to have to go on the list of spares. It's nowhere near failing at the moment, but preventative maintenance is a good thing. Next is the wiring for the fuel filter. Now, I'm not happy with this. It would appear that our trip in Australia has got rid of the whole lower section of the cable protector. It's gone brittle and broken off, so that is going to need to be replaced, because these wires here, as you can see, are quite vulnerable and wiring faults are horrible to deal with. One of the things I've checked is for any fluid leaks. All of these gaiters, I've checked they're in good condition. It's a bit dark in there, you can't see it with the camera, but I've also checked the gaiter around the main piston all the way around to make sure that that's got no splits and it's not leaking any fluid. I've also checked the thickness of the brake pads, which are very good, check them both sides, and the thickness of the disc itself. This has still got plenty of life in it. Looking at the disc closely, I've got no heavy scoring and no cracks, and I've also looked at it from end on to make sure it's not showing any signs of warping. It's not, it's fine, I'm happy with that. All is looking good here. If you're replacing the fuel filter, you don't need to worry about draining the sedimenter, but I'm going to show you how to drain the sedimenter anyway, so you know what to do. And then I'm going to change the filter also anyway. As you can see, I've put a bucket underneath it because we're going to be having some liquid come out. We start by removing the wiring harness from the bottom. There's a metal clip that you just push in, and then you pull the harness off. Now obviously the focus on this is servicing the vehicle used for overlanding, and it throws up some things that you don't normally find on vehicles used for just general driving around, and one of which is, I don't know whether you can see in there, there's Australian bull dust in there, which is a very fine red dust, typical from the Australian outback roads. The sedimenter is this part at the bottom here, and there's a tube for the liquid to come out. I'm trying to do this a bit cat-candy so you can see it. You just rotate this clockwise, until the water's out and you've just got fuel coming out. So that's the fuel sedimenter drained. Just got to clean it up a bit now. I'm going to deal with this exposed wire with some split cable protector. It's a bit fiddly to get on, but easy. It can be fiddly and easy at the same time. Go on. That's it, so that's the mechanical protection on. I'm just going to firm that up with some harness tape. I don't use insulation tape because that just goes horrible and slimy and falls off, but fabric harness tape has a tendency to stay where you put it, which is what we want. Just a tiny little bit in the middle. So that's it. I'm now happy that those exposed wires, which were likely to incur damage, are now adequately protected. Right, we're going to change the filter now. The first thing you have to do is disconnect the earth lead from the battery. I've already disconnected the wiring harness, so we're now going to turn the seat. It's on there tight. I've already tried it by hand, it's on very tight. This was last done by a garage up in Darwin. Shouldn't be this tight, but here we go. It's way too tight. Do expect fuel to come out. I'm emptying this into the bucket so it doesn't go anywhere it's not supposed to. There should be a rubber O-ring in there, which I can see has been left up here, so I'm going to slide that off. The new filter should come with a new one. You can see this one's very compressed, so I will be changing it. Next is cleaning. To make sure it's all nice and clean in there before we put the new filter on. This is the new filter. I'm just going to dip my finger in the fuel and wet the O-rings before screwing the new one back on squarely. These only need to be done hand tight. I suspect that whoever put the other one on did it more than hand tight, because it didn't come off easily. That's it. It's the new one on. Now I'm taking the old fuel sedimenter off of the old fuel filter. And this, I don't know whether you can see in there, is filthy dirty, so that's going to have a clean as well. Put up a bit of a fight, but the old one's off. So the new ring just pops on, like so. I'm also checking the condition of the plastic threads on here, knowing that somebody else has serviced my vehicle while we were abroad. Didn't have all of the tools with me that I needed, so somebody else has done this. If this is over tightened, you can strip the thread off of the plastic component. That now just goes back on again. Again, don't over tighten it, you'll strip the thread off of the plastic. That's it, that's fine. It's just a matter of reconnecting the wiring harness. Job done. That's the fuel filter changed. All that remains now is for me to reconnect the battery, start the engine, let it run for a bit and check for leaks. If there are any leaks, you probably just need to tighten it that little bit more, but don't use tools, it should only be hand tight. We're ready to put the wheel back on. I won't actually show you all of that, it's just one quick note about putting some copper grease around the spigot here before you put the wheel on, so it doesn't end up seized and almost impossible to get off, because Sod's Law says that will happen to you in the middle of the desert or somewhere like that. One of the horriblest wheel changes I've had to do was on the Udna track in, I can't remember how many degrees hot, but it was in the desert in the heat, and I was very glad that the wheel came off easy. The last thing you want is a seized wheel in those circumstances, because in that heat working can become a survival situation. The very last thing is to tighten your wheel nuts up to the correct torque, which is 140 newton meters. Note that you do the diagonal opposite wheel nut, which helps the wheel centre properly. Torque wrench is worth its weight in gold, especially if you're like me. Before I had a torque wrench, I used to have a habit of snapping bolts, not so much on the wheel but elsewhere. That's it. Job finished.